So I do have a couple of questions for you guys. So I want to know who in your friend group is the best dressed friend. Do you have someone in your friend group that you're like, they are the best dressed friend? Did you just say yourself, Brian? I thought you were like, me? So who's your best dressed friend? Shout it out. Who? Kamaya? That's pretty good. Who else? Who's your best dressed friend? Nobody? You have friends with awful fashion senses? Okay. All right, so then maybe who's the best singer in your friend group? Xavier, sit down. Pretty. That would be. I mean, that one I can't disagree on that one. You do have a pretty good voice. All right. Okay. Who has the best sense of humor?
Come on
Nah.
now.
Wyatt walks in. All right. Best sense of humor. Are any of you like, I am that person? I have the best sense of humor, other than Xavier. Steven, best sense of humor over there. Yeah, I could see that, Steven. Yeah. I think you have the best sense of humor, probably, out of your friend group. Yeah, you're pretty funny. You're pretty good over there. Guys, I think it's always kind of fun to talk about who's the best, who's the greatest of all time of things, especially because it's debatable, right? It's not like it's facts. It's just our opinion on who we think is the best, unless you're Xavier and you think it's facts the whole time.
Singing part, that's pretty cool.
But guys, we do this all the time when it comes to culture too, right? Because we talk about things like who's the greatest basketball player of all time? Not Xavier. Who's the greatest movie? What is the greatest movie series of all time? What do you guys think? Star Wars. I mean, I have to go with Twilight series. I mean, come on, guys. I'm just kidding. Or maybe who's the greatest superhero of all time? All right, Joey, what's your answer? Where are you at, Joey? What's your answer? Deadpool. So guys, these greatest of all time debates are always really interesting because you guys all answered different things, right? We had Star Wars versus Twilight, Spider-Man versus, I mean, that's not a very great comparison though, but Spider-Man versus Deadpool or other great superheroes. And then you justify those answers with different reasonings and stuff. And so it's part of what makes us debating and figuring out who's the greatest of all time so entertaining. But in this series, we're going to be in the series for the next 2 weeks, and we're really talking about people who Jesus said are the greatest of all time. And so he didn't talk about specific people, so there's not just like one or two people that he was like, they're the greatest of all time, nobody will beat that. He talked about a specific thing that people did when they were the greatest of all time. And then he told other people that they could do the same thing. And so the question is, what is this thing that Jesus advised people to do that makes them the greatest of all time? And that's serving. And so when I talk about serving, because I feel like that has a lot of different definitions, but when we talk about serving, I'm just talking about doing something good for other people, whether that's a big thing or a small thing. And I think we could all agree that serving is really important. Serving others is important, right? Yes? No? Yeah? Yeah? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? We think great, not great? Okay, cool. And we think it's something we all should care about, though. We should care about it, right? But I kind of believe that a lot of times it's not something that we think about very often in our day-to-day lives. Or it's that serving isn't always our favorite thing to do. I mean, it's not like that we don't dislike it or we don't have a problem with it. It's just that there's other things going on in our lives, especially with your guys' generation. I think you guys are some of the busiest people in the entire world, especially with the stage of life you guys are at, because you're just coming off of a whole school year where you have had so much stuff going on with practices, projects, presentations, social lives, exams, all of the things, plus the pressure. There's people in your lives putting pressure on you to improve on grades, improve on your getting better at your performance in sports, or maybe you have to be working harder. And so then you're trying to work on getting better at those things that you're already trying to be good at, right? So you guys are super busy. And so how in the world can you have time to help somebody else when most of the time it all goes to those things that you're trying to balance and juggle? And that's a very real issue. Or sometimes it kind of feels like a chore That is how I feel sometimes about serving. It's kind of gets to the point to where sometimes it's not necessarily that we want to do it. Sometimes it feels more like we have to do it. And then when we have that have to do it put on the label of something like that, then nobody wants to do that. You don't want to be told what to do or that you should be doing that thing. Or maybe you've given it a shot, but it wasn't really that great. So probably left you wondering if it was even good to do in the first place and if you really want to do that again. And so I think we all come to different places when it comes to serving. And we all have plenty of reasons to not make serving others a part of our everyday lives. And even if maybe we do jump in to helping somebody else, sometimes it's not for the greatest reasons. Because I'm not going to lie, when I was in high school, I served because it was a requirement for school, or I wanted to go because my friends were going, and I wanted to go hang out with my friends, or, parents, guardians, adults in your lives were telling you, hey, you really should go do that thing. Basically, they're telling you, you have to go and do it. That's a lot of the times what I did when I was in high school is I went and served because of those reasons. But guys, here's the thing. Serving others is such an important part of our faith. It's one of the best ways that we could really follow Jesus' example of when he lived here and what he left behind. And so guys, maybe the problem that we're having with serving and when it has that kind of conundrum or that thoughts around that word when we say it, maybe it's not that we have a problem with serving. Maybe the problem is about how we see serving and the way that we picture what it looks like and the way we think about it. And so what if it was possible to change that? So that's what the series is really all about, is how do we get to look at serving others in a totally different way? And honestly, I think that if we want to figure out a new way to view serving, then there really isn't a better place to look than the ultimate greatest of all time, which is Jesus, not the Passover. But that comes later. Thank you. It's Jesus. Jesus was the greatest of all time. We can all agree on that one, right? Friends, the way that Jesus treated other people is the best example we have to understand what it really means to live out what Jesus says matters most. And so where we're picking up tonight, we're going to look at a scripture from the book of John in the New Testament. And so John was somebody that lived with Jesus during the time that he was alive a couple thousand years ago. And he was someone who lived, walked, and served with Jesus all the time. And the story that he's recounting in his book there that we're going to read in a second is one where Jesus actually really went out of his way to serve the very people he was closest to. And that person was John. And so John was one of those people that he was receiving the service from Jesus. And so where we're actually picking up in tonight is we are in this really fun Passover. Does anybody know what Passover means? Yes. Can you tell us what it means? Close. Anybody else want to try to make a guess at Passover? It's okay, I have the answer right here in my notes, guys. So guys, Passover was this really important holiday where the Jewish people, if you didn't know, Jesus was Jewish. There was not Christianity back then when Jesus was alive because Jesus created Christianity. So it was a really important holiday that the Jewish people remembered the way that God was faithful and he saved and rescued their ancestors from slavery in Egypt thousands of years ago. So it's kind of the story that we hear from Moses, if you recognize that figure. So you were kind of close, Kaylin. It was a little bit about the similar stuff, but we kind of get to that. So there was something really different about this particular Passover. So every year they would celebrate Passover and celebrate the remembering of God's faithfulness. And this Passover was different. So they had all gone to Jerusalem, all of his friends and closest followers and Jesus. And it's something even the disciples didn't even know on this night. And so if you know anything about the story, you would know that at this point, when they were celebrating Passover, it was Jesus' final hours. It was basically kind of his last day before he was going to be arrested and killed. And Jesus knew that. So he knew going into what we're going to see and talk about that he was about to get arrested and killed that very night. And so, as he gathered with his friends in these very final moments that he gets with them, Jesus wanted to share something really important with them. something that would help them know how to keep living out all that he had taught them for those 3 years that they lived together and traveled around and taught people together with. He wanted them to know something really important when he was gone. And this is where we're going to pick up here. So they're sitting at dinner together. So they're all gathering around at a house, and they're sitting down to eat a meal together. It's what we call the final supper, the last supper, or the last dinner, whatever you want to call it. So this is Jesus. So it means Jesus. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, and wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with a towel he had around them. That's all we have in that one? Yes, we're good. Sorry. I thought I was kept on going, but we're staying there. So guys, this is not today's standard. I don't think any of us would want to ever wash anybody's feet, right? That is a really weird thing. That is not a normal thing in society, but it was a really normal thing back then. Because if you think about it, think about when you, during the summer, go to the beach or go to the pool and you're walking around in your sweaty, gross, wet sandals and it has sand in there, or maybe they're wet and you've been walking around in them for a whole week. They're pretty gross, right? So that is what would happen back then 2,000 years ago. They didn't have cars to travel around in. Their roads weren't very well paved or well done. And so they were walking around in these places and they would get dust and dirt all over their feet. And so it was very custom to where when you would come into somebody's house, the first thing that they would really do is a servant, not the host, a servant would come in, and it was common courtesy to wash your feet so then it would be very clean. So everywhere you went, then you wouldn't leave gross stuff everywhere. So does that make sense? Are we all on the same page with that? I'm not asking anybody to wash anybody's feet. Please don't do that with each other. So, guys, because of that, when you see that, this is what makes this story so incredible and so crazy and so wild, that Jesus was the one that chose to do this for his disciples. Because remember, I said not the host, which is the one that owns the home, the one that's like the cool guy that's in the household. It is just a lowly servant, somebody that you pay to work in the household, or maybe even a slave back then. So it was their job to go and do that. It was dirty work and nobody wanted to do that. And yet, this was Jesus. This was the Savior of the world. This was the one who had the power to heal and make miracles happen. Guys, this was the Son of God coming onto earth in human form. So that is what we're picturing here. And he was also the one that went out of his way to serve his friends and wash their feet. Instead of being the host, he was the one that made himself lower and made himself a servant. Guys, Jesus didn't serve his friends in this way so that other people would think he was super amazing, right? Sometimes we do that because we want people to think that we're really cool and that we care a lot about what we do with our time and stuff. He didn't do it because it was required of him or a chore that he had to finish. There were servants in the household that would have done that for him, but he chose to do that. And he didn't even do it because God made him to do it. God didn't make him do that. That was something that Jesus chose to do on his own. Guys, Jesus washed their feet for no other reason than to show the disciples, one, that he cared for them deeply, and two, to show them what serving others is really all about. Because guys, remember, these were some of Jesus's very last moments that he would ever get with his friends, his closest people that he traveled around with for 3 years and did everything with. He could have taken that time to do or say just about anything. And yet, Jesus simply just chose to serve and care for them in a really weird way that you would never think of. And this was really important to him. This was a real way to show his disciples how much he really, truly cared and loved them. So we're going to take a look at what he says a little bit later on after they have a little rebuttal. And they're like, no, Jesus, don't do that. And he's like, no, I want to serve you. And they're like, no. So this is the next scripture. So he says, and since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. So friends, he's not talking about they now have to go around and physically wash everybody else's feet. He's giving them an example of how they can be able to step down out of their positions of power and be able to step into serving another person. Let me to give it to you guys this way. Who here, raise your hand if you have ever watched one of those videos to where a relative who's in the military surprises their family by coming home unexpectedly. We've all seen that, right? We cry every time. I get so emotional about it. And it's just something like, why is it so emotional for us? Why is it that every time we watch those videos, we're like sitting there trying to be all cool, being like, I'm not crying, but everybody can totally tell that you're crying and tearing up there. But guys, I think there's something else at play there other than just like a really emotional thing. We're watching strangers here. It's not like we're personally connected with any of them. But this is what we're talking about tonight. When somebody shows up for somebody else, it's powerful, especially in big ways like that, but also in little ways. Guys, you and I were wired to serve others and make an impact in each other's lives. When you watch those videos, it's not just an emotional warm and fuzzies that you get. It's something deeper in your heart that's sparked. Because guys, God created us to be relational. And God created us to serve others. And that's how we could be relational with each other. It's why we have the potential to find so much fulfillment from showing up and serving others. And so friends, here's my challenge for us in Jesus' words. I'm just going to say it a little bit different. All he was asking the disciples to do, and what he's asking us to do as well, is to do something small to serve others, even when we don't have to. And maybe even especially when we don't have to. Because when we have to, people expect it, right? When we have to go and do something, it's something that we all have to do. It's not like it's a big deal. But when you don't have to do it and you do it anyways, that means something. Friends, instead of going into serving thinking that it's a chore or maybe an obligation or something that you don't have time to go and do, go into it remembering Jesus' example of those final hours, what he chose to do. Do it because Jesus did it for us, to show us what God is like. Serve somebody else in even the smallest way as a response to the way that Jesus served and loved you. Guys, it's exactly what the disciples did. And we could see this. They continued Jesus' acts of service in so many different ways towards each other and everybody that meant long after Jesus left them, long after he died and rose again to spend a little bit of time with them, and then he went back into heaven or wherever he went. And thousands of years later, we're still talking about how important that impact is. And look at what the church looks like today. Because of that example Jesus left with them, we have this church. That is what the church is about. It's about serving each other and serving our community and showing up for each other. It's why this is the greatest of all time mindset too. That's why this series is called The Greatest of All Time, because we wind up following the example of the literal greatest person of all time, which is Jesus. And we even experience something really great for ourselves when we get outside of maybe thinking of serving in one of the negative lights and we think of it in that way. So friends, how can we start actually putting this into action? How can we start doing something small to serve others even when we don't have to? So my first thing that I would suggest to you guys to do is for all of us, and even me, is to show up personally. So I want you guys to show up in someone else's week. Show up in somebody else's life this week. Challenge yourself to do it right now, this week, from starting tomorrow into next Sunday when we come back for a second week of this series. What can you do? I know that you guys are in a super crazy time to where you might be busy, or maybe you might not be as busy and you have a little bit more time to be able to show up for somebody. Go to somebody's last game when they're finishing their season. Stop by their work if they go and work somewhere, and go and just say hi and make their day. And if you are really busy with all of your final exams, because hashtag testing season, I hate it, it's the worst, right? But even if you are super busy still, maybe just send somebody a text to encourage them as they're going through their finals too. It doesn't have to be big. I'm talking about something small, a small way of showing up. Figure out some ways and times that you can be present in the lives of your friends that are around you and in the moments that matter for them and not just for you. Think about what would matter in their life, because everybody's different. Everybody needs a different thing. And you know who is a really, really great example of this and does this every single week? I want you to take a second and look around in the adults in this room. Make eye contact with your small group leader right now. Guys, your small group leaders show up every single week for you guys. They are not paid. They don't get very much recognition or credit very often because they're sitting there doing the work. But guys, they spend countless of hours away from their lives, away from their families. They take off time of work to go and spend time with you on retreats and trips and going and doing fun things with you because they care so deeply about you. They want so much for you to know that you are loved beyond measure, not only by them, but also by God. And they want so deeply to be able to help you guys have a really intimate relationship with God and a really close relationship with each other so that we can be able to have community. So if you need help figuring out how to be able to show it personally, ask your small group leaders because they do a great job of that every week. And then the second thing we could do is to show up locally. So guys, you are about to get off of school, and some of you are about to have a lot of time on your hands. And now we could spend a lot of time sitting at home or hanging out with friends and doing all the fun things we want to do, or we could sign up to serve somewhere. We can get involved in something. We could be a mentor to a younger kid. You guys, older kids in this room, have the really great opportunity to be able to be friends with the younger kids in this room because when you guys were their age, you had somebody that showed up for you that was older. So start showing up for the people that are younger than you in this youth group. Maybe even start serving at church for all the kids that are even younger in preschool and elementary school in the morning time. Do it once a month. Do it twice a month. They could always use a help in Annona Kids and Annona Little Kids. Or maybe even a tech team, wherever. But sometimes showing up isn't really about being there physically, but it's about providing something that other people can't provide themselves. It's not about the recognition or credit. This is just about us doing for others what Jesus did for us. And so sometimes a small step can make the biggest difference in somebody's life. You never know what a small compliment, a small conversation, making sure you acknowledge their presence and saying hi to them, or maybe inviting them into a game that you're playing on a Sunday night when we're hanging out will do in their lives. That can mean the world to them and change their lives forever, and that took you 2 seconds. So friends, do something small to serve each other, even when you don't have to. And so as you guys are heading out to small groups, start thinking about what that one small thing is that you could do this week between now and next Sunday.